It's my honor to be speaking with you all. Let me just begin with a reflection and a personal commitment. We have certainly been reminded in recent weeks of the importance of communication. While we have our regular channels and reports, specific requests from First Nation leadership and peoples suggest that providing more and new communication opportunities, both formal and informal, are critical right now and are important steps forward in our work together. So today, this marks a first formal video address of 2013, marking our progress, challenges, and setting out our key objectives together. Our work is not about the actions of one person in any one place, but rather our assembly calls upon us all to be united in our actions, to strengthen and to support one another. With this in mind, I offer my comments to reflect the voices of the leadership and to invite dialogue and reflection from across our nations. Recent events have helped to win our issues a higher priority among Canadians and with Canadian governments than at any time in recent years. The proud and determined voices of our peoples, their actions from coast to coast to coast, have achieved this unprecedented attention. The National Executive and I will and are working to maintain this pressure on the governments and all Canadians. Just a few days ago, I was honored to host the National Executive in my home territories of Ahousaht. We came together at this important time, in ceremony, as is the way of our peoples. We came together seized by the urgency of the need to act, mindful of the expectations, the drive, and the voices of all of our peoples. Our demand for greater justice, fairness, and political, social, and economic development must continue to ring through all of the corridors of parliaments in Ottawa and provincially, as well as in the courts, and indeed in our home territories. We are all warriors in this battle. The fight takes different form in different places, but make no mistake, it's a fight and a struggle that unites all of us. It's a fight that compels us to stand firm, to build allies, and to leave no stone unturned. It's a fight and a drive that instructs us to ensure we make every effort always. We all have a job to do. It's our sacred duty to our ancestors, and it's our responsibility here and now to our kids. We will continue our fight through Parliament and through the courts. Our successes through legal challenge continue to mount. AFN recently supported and helped achieve an important victory for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as we challenged the federal government to release all the documentation needed in their critical work for healing and reconciliation. Now we take the next step with the First Nations Family and Child Caring Centre in our appeal to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. This is a legal action that we've been leading since the very beginning in 2007, and we will not relinquish. First Nations across the country are involved in litigation to protect and to advance their rights. At the same time, there are other critical avenues that we must advance. There is the work internationally and the work of building partnerships. This effort bolsters our arguments and propels us forward. We actively engage with the international community, with the United Nations, and with civil society, and have found important allies that are prepared to work with us. And at the center of what we must do, we advance the clear mandates given by First Nations to advocate for change with all governments and with all Canadians, grounded squarely on our rights, identities, and responsibilities as Indigenous peoples with inherent rights and as treaty partners with the Crown. We all share in our sacred duties to our ancestors and to the people today and to those unborn. We together have passed hundreds of resolutions directing action for change. It is important that we remain united behind these demands, the agenda adopted by our peoples in one assembly after another. At the same time, we acknowledge that some have been critical of our decision-making structures, and they are not perfect. Indeed, some of our structures reflect the colonial past that we reject. They can be improved, and that is a discussion we must and will have. Today's AFN is the creation of our elders, building on what was there. They knew this would need reform. Tomorrow's AFN will continue that process. The National Executive is committed to carrying forward this reflection. As we engage in these discussions, we must ensure that dialogue does not prevent us from seizing this moment to achieve change. Our priority, our focus must remain seeking the changes that we've fought for so long in the lives of our peoples. Every First Nation and every treaty area must make the choices that are best for them. Together, we can lead the momentum to create this opportunity for all our peoples. As you know, as we've reported in detail, we achieved some progress in our January 11th meeting with the Government of Canada. We stood firm and delivered the direction from the consensus document worked on the days prior, which build on decades of resolution and mandate. Together, the chiefs, leaders, and elders who joined that meeting achieved recognition and commitment from the Prime Minister for political oversight and direction from the highest level of government. From the Prime Minister himself, his senior officials, and those of the Privy Council office. In addition, a mandate was established to advance high-level dialogue on fundamental matters of treaty implementation as determined by treaty nations, and on comprehensive claims reform. Members of the National Executive are pushing forward these commitments and driving for tangible results that then every First Nations can determine how and when to engage. There was a frank exchange on each of the items presented. On education, our resolve that begins with Indian control of Indian education and fairness and excellence in education for our kids remains a paramount priority. We will not subject our kids to the disastrous policies and practices of the past any longer. We demand the fulfillment of rights and responsibilities to deliver the promise of education that every First Nations child and parent can be proud of, and we will work to support every First Nation in providing this environment within their communities as determined by and for their peoples. The Chiefs Committee on Education will continue its work of supporting every region and treaty area and advancing First Nations control of First Nations education. And today, as we honor those lost and call attention to the utterly unacceptable tragedy of murdered and missing women, we demand action, and we will support one another to achieve safety and security. We continue our press for a national inquiry, and we demand concrete action to end this violence and injustice. We will host a National Justice Forum in early April to confirm and discuss actions that we must take forward. On every one of our priorities, we must continue the firm press for justice, for fairness, and for respect and for change as determined by First Nations. On each element, we're committed to strengthening our reporting and engagement of all peoples. On each, the National Executive have a firm portfolio responsibility, and we will be working with a team of dedicated staff to link with efforts locally, regionally, nationally, as well as international efforts, and we will update the political, legal, technical, and advocacy strategies through new dedicated spaces on our website and new communication products and tools. These discussions, this work, does not mean that the fight subsides. Quite the contrary. Now the real work, and perhaps the demanding the biggest effort, begins. It means holding the line on commitments and driving to implementation. It means staring down bureaucratic intransigence, and it means delivering on real results. It means investments in fairness for our kids right now. It means every First Nation, every treaty area having the opportunity to advance rights implementation on their own terms. It means finally achieving recognition and implementation of our rights and title, as opposed to the unjust threat of extinguishment. These are our goals that will never change, will never subside until they're achieved as determined by every First Nation. It's our responsibility to drive change for our children, grounded in our rights and in our culture. We must be prepared to seize every opportunity to achieve the future they deserve. As a young person, I had the privilege of learning from the wisdom of our elders at home. As a leader in British Columbia, I had the honor to be counseled by elders from across Canada. As a leader at the national level for the past 4 years, I've learned from all of our former leaders, from the current and former leaders of many diverse nations. They have described the sometimes painful process of building our structures and our organizations. At many different points, there have been periods of disagreement and discord. But at each point, when our peoples have engaged in vigorous debate, we've also listened and respected one another. We overcame each of those challenges while respecting the autonomy of each nation. We have always recognized that our peoples and their leaders are our decision makers. As leaders, we come together to advocate, to fight for the achievement of the demands they have chosen. That process always involved change. When we transformed the National Indian Brotherhood into the Assembly of First Nations, we did it during the politically charged atmosphere of the constitutional talks. In 1980, our Declaration of Nations was adopted, leading to the way to the transition to the Assembly of First Nations, when we agreed to respect our diversity, to practice tolerance, and work together as good neighbors, uniting our strength to advance our peoples. In 2005, the Afn Renewal Commission encouraged us to look to the future and to establish the conditions that will ensure our organization is respected by all levels of government, is rooted in our languages and cultures, is representative of the diverse nations we serve, and most importantly, is responsive to the demands of our nations and our peoples. Many changes were made. Many more conversations remain. Today, we take this forward through respectful dialogue and commitment, respecting our traditions, respecting each other, and respectful of our different approaches to achieve progress for our peoples. With the wisdom of our elders and determination of our peoples, we can seize this moment of real opportunity. If we remain inspired and strengthened by the vision of a better day for every one of our children, we can win these victories together. Let me just conclude by reflecting on what compels us forward right now. It's our greatest strength and our greatest source of pride. It's our peoples. It's the voices of all of you right across the land. The voices of our nations are coming together and they are gaining in strength. They are driving change and they will not subside. And let me say this to you. The voices of 30,000 kids in foster care right now deserve to be heard. The over 600 murdered and missing women and their families and the growing number of incarcerated and those affected by disease and despair deserve to be heard in every forum. The teachers, the parents, and the students struggling to provide basic schooling for their kids deserve to be heard. And the issues raised at every level in front of every audience deserve to be heard and deserve our full energy and our full attention, not just within our nations, but throughout Canada and beyond. Together, we can achieve much. Inaction is not an option. We must together overcome any fear that holds us back by strengthening our resolve to work together. Through the guidance of our teachings and our elders, through respecting the vision of those that forged our great organizations, we can and must take this forward now. We must be prepared to try. We must be passionate in our support for each other. Our work is never easy, but together we can shoulder the burden. The hard work of building our communities, being there for every one of our kids, making sure that they're nurtured in their language and culture, and have safe, supportive home environment, this is our work together as Indigenous peoples, as neighbors, as relatives, and as friends. I need only think of the kids I meet when I'm honored to visit you in your home territories. Young Jaden in northern Manitoba, making his grandpa proud with his good marks despite incredible odds of isolation, poor infrastructure, and numerous other challenges that are simply not acceptable. Or young Carly, who joined us at our assembly last December, a shining star of the Mi'kmaq and proud example of what we can achieve when our kids are supported and nurtured in their language and culture, in their homes and their schools. Or so many other kids and youth, kids with big dreams, high hopes, kids that deserve our every effort. Together we can be this change that our kids need. Together we can and must not relent. We have the solutions. We have the passion. We can and must drive this change.